In 1858, a chemist's mistake killed hundreds of people, and the poison he created is hiding in your house right now. This is the story of how one scientist's greed turned an entire city into a death trap. And the worst part? He knew exactly what he was doing. Let me set the scene for you. Bradford, England, 1858. A bustling industrial city during the height of the Victorian era. Factories belch smoke into the sky. Workers earn barely enough to survive, and families gather at corner candy shops after a long week of brutal labor. It's one of the few affordable pleasures in their lives. One particular shop on Green Market Street is selling something special: peppermint humbugs, hard candies with green and white stripes that dissolve slowly on your tongue. Kids love them. Adults buy them as treats. They're cheap, just 2 pennies for a decent handful. On October 30th, a Saturday night, people line up out the door to buy them. The shop owner, William Hardacre, known as Humbug Billy to locals, can barely keep up with demand. Within hours, over 200 people are violently ill. Vomiting, burning throats, convulsions, skin turning strange colors. By Sunday morning, 21 people are dead, most of them children. The police immediately suspect poison. Panic spreads through Bradford's narrow streets. Parents rush to the shop, demanding answers. But here's the terrifying part. Nobody poisoned the candy on purpose. The killer was something called arsenic trioxide, and it got into those candies because of one chemist who decided to cut corners. Now, to understand how this happened, you need to know how candy was made in Victorian England. Peppermint humbugs required a white powder called daft, basically a mix of sugar, powdered limestone, and gum arabic. This powder gave the candies their distinctive white color and smooth texture. But there was a problem. Real daft was expensive. For poor candy makers operating on razor-thin margins, the cost could make or break their business. So some would substitute it with plaster of Paris, calcium sulfate. Still white, still cheap. Not exactly food grade, but it wouldn't kill you. The authorities turned a blind eye because regulating food purity wasn't really a thing yet. Here's where our chemist enters the story. His name was Charles Hodgson, and he worked at a pharmacy owned by a man named Shipley. The pharmacy sat on Shipley Street, serving Bradford's working-class neighborhoods. On that fateful October day, the candy shop owner, a man named Joseph Neal who worked for Humbug Billy, sent his young assistant, James Archer, to Hodgson's pharmacy to buy some daft. 12 pounds of it, but Hodgson didn't have any daft in stock that day. Now, a responsible chemist would have simply said, "I'm sorry, we don't have that." But Hodgson was in a bind. His boss was out of town. He wanted to make the sale. Money was tight, so instead of admitting he didn't have daft, he looked around his pharmacy. His eyes landed on a container on a high shelf, partially hidden behind other bottles. It was labeled daft. Inside was a white powder that looked about right. He sold 12 pounds of it to young James Archer for the price of daft. There was just one problem. That container didn't actually have daft in it. It had arsenic trioxide, one of the deadliest poisons known to man. And here's the part that makes your blood run cold. Hodgson later admitted he suspected something was wrong. The powder felt different. The texture wasn't quite right, but he sold it anyway. Now you might be wondering, how does a professional chemist accidentally sell poison instead of a candy ingredient? Here's the disturbing truth. It wasn't really an accident. Let me explain how arsenic ended up in that container in the first place. Years earlier, Hodgson had run out of proper storage containers. Arsenic trioxide was commonly used in Victorian pharmacies for making rat poison, treating certain skin conditions, even preserving taxidermy specimens. So Hodgson grabbed an empty container that used to hold daft, filled it with arsenic, and put it on a high shelf. He knew it was mislabeled. He'd used arsenic from that very container multiple times over the years to make poisonous compounds for pest control. But when James Archer came asking for daft, Hodgson saw an opportunity to make a quick sale. He was low on money. His boss was away. The customer was in a hurry and wouldn't know the difference. So he grabbed the mislabeled container and handed it over. He didn't tell Archer what was really inside. He didn't double-check the contents. He just took the money. About 3 shillings. 3 shillings. That's what 21 lives were worth to him. Now here's where it gets even worse. Joseph Neal, the candy maker, mixed the daft with sugar, peppermint oil, and other ingredients. Immediately, he noticed something was wrong. The mixture looked strange. It had a grayish tint instead of pure white. The texture was grainy and wouldn't blend properly. It didn't smell quite right.
Neil even complained to his colleague, "This daft isn't right. Something's off about it."
But he'd already invested money in the other ingredients. Sugar was expensive. Peppermint oil cost a week's wages. He couldn't afford to throw it all away and start over. So he made a choice. He sold the candies anyway. That night, families bought the humbugs. Children sucked on them walking home. Parents shared them after dinner. And by the next morning, people started dropping like flies. The symptoms were horrific. Violent stomach cramps, uncontrollable vomiting, burning sensations in the throat and mouth, seizures. Doctors had no idea what was happening at first. Some thought it was cholera. Others suspected food poisoning from spoiled meat. The authorities moved fast. Bradford's medical officer, a doctor named William Bell, examined the bodies and tested the leftover candies. Within hours, he confirmed everyone's worst fear: arsenic poisoning. Massive amounts of it. Some of the candies contained enough arsenic to kill an adult with just 2 pieces. They traced the poisoned candy back to Humbug Billy's shop, then to Joseph Neal, who made them, and finally to Hodgson's pharmacy. When investigators showed up at Hodgson's door, his story fell apart immediately. First, he claimed he didn't know arsenic was in the container. He thought it really was daft. Then, when they pointed out he'd used that same container for years, he changed his story. He said he forgot it contained arsenic. Then he admitted he had suspicions, but thought the assistant wanted it for pest control, not candy making. Finally, under mounting pressure and faced with chemical evidence, he confessed. He'd knowingly sold arsenic labeled as daft because he wanted to make the sale and didn't think it mattered what the customer used it for. The courtroom trial became a national sensation. Newspapers across England covered it daily. Crowds packed the gallery. Joseph Neal, the candy maker, was also charged. But here's where public opinion violently split. Neal was a poor man, barely scraping by, trying to make a living. He had no chemical training, no reason to suspect the powder was poison. When he noticed something was off, he even complained about it. But he was desperate not to lose money on wasted ingredients. Was he negligent? Absolutely. But was he a murderer? Hodgson, on the other hand, was a trained chemist. He'd studied pharmacy. He knew arsenic trioxide on site. He knew what it could do to the human body. He'd mixed it into rat poisons dozens of times. He knew the container was mislabeled. He knew the powder wasn't daft. And he sold it anyway for 3 shillings. The verdict shocked everyone. Joseph Neal was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 1 month of hard labor, a harsh punishment for a man who was arguably a victim himself. Charles Hodgson? He walked free. The court ruled that while Hodgson was negligent and reckless, he didn't intentionally murder anyone. He couldn't have known the powder would end up in candy, they argued. He had no legal duty to verify what customers did with chemicals they purchased. The public was outraged. Newspapers called it a miscarriage of justice. Editorials demanded reform. One Bradford newspaper wrote, "A chemist who cannot tell arsenic from daft has no business dispensing medicine to the public." But here's the thing. This disaster actually changed history. Before the Bradford sweet poisoning, there were almost no regulations on how pharmacies stored and labeled dangerous chemicals. Think about that for a moment. You could walk into any shop in Victorian England and buy arsenic. No questions asked, no warning labels, no record of sale. Arsenic was sold as casually as aspirin is today. You could use it to kill rats, to make green wallpaper dye, to treat certain medical conditions. Pharmacists stored it wherever they had space, sometimes right next to food ingredients. The system relied entirely on trust and professional competence, and Bradford proved how deadly that could be. After the tragedy, everything changed. Britain passed the Pharmacy Act of 1868, which required all poisons to be clearly labeled with skull and crossbones symbols. Only licensed pharmacists could sell dangerous substances. Detailed records had to be kept of every poison sold, including buyer's name and intended use. Poisons had to be stored in separate, locked cabinets. Warning labels had to be in a specific color, bright red, that couldn't be mistaken. It was one of the first modern drug safety laws in the world. Other countries soon followed Britain's lead. 21 people died horrible deaths. But their tragedy led to regulations that saved millions of lives over the next century and a half. Now, remember at the beginning when I said this poison is still in your house? Here's what I mean. Arsenic compounds are still used today, in pressure-treated wood for decks and fences, in some agricultural pesticides, in certain semiconductor manufacturing processes, and even in tiny amounts in some electronics. The difference is, we now have strict regulations about how it's stored, labeled, and sold. You can't just grab a random container off a shelf and assume it's safe. Warning labels exist for a reason. Poisons are locked away. Sales are tracked. Every skull and crossbones symbol you see, every danger poison label, every childproof cap, they all trace back to tragedies like Bradford. The Bradford sweet poisoning taught us a crucial lesson that still applies today. Shortcuts kill. Hodgson wanted to make a quick sale. 3 shillings seemed worth the risk of not checking the container. Neil wanted to avoid wasting ingredients. The cost of sugar seemed more important than the strange color of the mixture. Both decisions seemed small at the time. Understandable even. But small mistakes with dangerous substances don't stay small. They compound. They spread. And before you know it, hundreds of people are fighting for their lives. Think about that next time you're tempted to mix cleaning chemicals that shouldn't be mixed, or reuse a container for something it wasn't designed for, or ignore a warning label because it's probably fine. The people of Bradford learned that lesson in the worst possible way. The Bradford sweet poisoning of 1858 remains one of the deadliest accidental poisonings in British history. 21 people dead, over 200 severely ill, all because one chemist decided his profit mattered more than safety. Charles Hodgson lived the rest of his life in Bradford. He never faced criminal charges. He never publicly apologized. He eventually left pharmacy work and faded into obscurity. Joseph Neal served his sentence and disappeared from historical records. His fate remains unknown. But the children who died? History remembers them. Mary Ann Greenwood, age 4. William Hanson, age 9. Ann Preston, age 12. Elizabeth Jennings, age 3. They're the reason we have warning labels today. They're the reason pharmacies are regulated. They're the reason you can trust that the medicine in your cabinet is what it says on the label. Next week, I'm covering what happened when the government tried to hide a similar poisoning incident in the 1900s, and how a single journalist risked everything to expose it. The cover-up involved politicians, newspapers, and even the royal family. If you think that's crazy, wait until you see what happened when they tried to cover it up. That video drops next week, so subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you learned something new today, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover these forgotten stories from history. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.